Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Story and Song for another one of our little author chats that we do periodically. And as you know, if you've been to some of them before, we really enjoy doing it in a much more conversational way, make it more informal, because it's always been my feeling for the events that I've gone to in the past, to just have an author read from his or her book is kind of offensive, because I can read myself, you know. So what I'm expecting of the author is to convince me why I should read that book. And hopefully that's what's going to come out of this conversation today to some extent. So welcome.
Thank you.
Jane Isabella Jane. One of the first exchanges we had was, what do I call you?
I
you know,
know.
because the book obviously is by Isabella Stewart, but you said, oh, by the way, my real name is Jane Chittick. Okay, so how did that come about? Why don't you start by telling us when you took on the persona of Isabella Stewart, whether or not it's an alter ego? What's the story behind it?
Well, I wanted a pen name for the book, partly for self-preservation, being on the island of Martha's Vineyard where everybody knows everybody. And I thought I would be clever and disguise myself. But of course, everyone found out who it really was, you know. So that didn't work. But anyway, I did choose the name I wanted Isabella Bennett, because that was my mother's name. And Isabella Bennett and Isabel Bennett and a slew of other variations were already taken by various authors, believe it or not. So then I went, and I come, from Martha's Vineyard, and I love museums, and one of the best museums in Boston is the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. It's a 16th century Italian palazzo that was brought brick by brick and stucco by stucco and window by window to Boston by Isabella Stewart Gardner. And she had it put together again in Boston, and it's charming and filled with lots and lots of beautiful art. And in fact, there was a big robbery there about 10 years ago, and major pieces were stolen. So I thought Isabella Stewart would be catchy for New Englanders because they knew of the museum.
So talk a little bit about your history with Martha's Vineyard. Is it a place you grew up, or when did you get there, and how long
Depends
were you
what you
there?
mean by grow up.
Well, that's true. Some of us
I'm
never do.
hoping I'm going to grow up here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. I get that.
but probably
So-
not.
Or is it the place of your birth? Put it that way.
No, it's not the place of my birth, but I was born in central Massachusetts and went to schools there, both prep school, boarding school for young women. And I was always breaking the rules and getting campused and being punished and not being able to go on weekends home. And then then my parents sent me to an all-women's four-year college where I was doing the same type of thing there. And then I loved art, and I did a lot of painting, and I convinced my parents to send me to Florence, Italy for a summer to study art. It was more studying the Italian men in white suits and white shoes and Vespas. So I did a really good job at that. But on the way, I met a fairly young Frenchman on a train. And he remembered me, and I didn't remember him, but he somehow tracked me down in Florence. And I went to, at the end of the summer, I went to his family's home, and we eventually ended up getting married. But what brought me to the Vineyard, because I'd been in France and I'd been here and there, was I was offered the job to start their Historic Preservation Trust, which is a private nonprofit. And they have absolutely beautiful buildings there that, a lot of people just didn't really appreciate. And there was one philanthropist who was willing to put up the money originally, initially, but really wanted it started. And so I somehow met him, sort of one of these odd events. I wasn't interviewing, and he offered me the job. So I went there in 1980. 1980, and I sat in a desk, and I said, well, I've got to do something. So a couple of months later, it's called the Old Whaling Church. It is a 1843 Greek revival built in the whaling days. That's the whaling. And the congregation couldn't afford to keep it up anymore. There were 20 or 30 people in it. And they approached the Preservation Trust and asked if we would take it on and restore it and turn it into a public use. So that was my first project. And we did that. It was a wonderful project. And we turned it into the Performing Arts Center for the island. So living there on the island and doing this work, I began to know lots and lots of people, and they began to know me. And as the first project, the Whaling Church, culminated in a big opening in June of the following year, I began to talk with a lot of real estate brokers because, of course, they had their clients, and they're very wealthy clients. And the Vineyard is really two classes of people from economic point of view. The very wealthy and the ones who are sort of eking by, cleaning houses, fishing, carpentry, and so forth. And so there's really a big divide there. But I thought my best bet to start the fundraising, because it was my responsibility to raise money for all the funds, was to start getting to know the real estate brokers. And Maria, who is the primary character in this book, was one of those people. And I'll go into her in a little bit. But so I got into that sort of whole thing, and I became a real estate broker, thinking that might help me, but it didn't. But it didn't matter. And so I was there. I became very involved in the town. I was both elected, appointed. I was a gubernatorial appointee from the then governor. Actually, he made me a justice of the peace. So I then started marrying people, and
marrying others, you mean?
Well, yeah, because I always say, and I've married 90, and I married 94 people.
Okay.
Right, not me personally.
Yeah, not your own.
I've had a couple of my own,
Okay.
but not 94. And so I really got to know the island, and the island is a very interesting place. First, it doesn't have a bridge, and that's why I like Amelia Island. It has a bridge. You can get off and you can get on, because there in the Vineyard, if you miss a ferry or there's weather or whatever else, you're stuck on one side or the other side. There's only water in between. It's a real island. And I thought that this would be a little bit much better. So,
well, that begs the question of, after living in Martha's Vineyard for as long as you did, which sounds like it was at least 40 years.
I did go and come with my career, which was eventually nonprofit leadership and fundraising around the country, but came back 5 years ago to retire.
And how did you discover Emilia?
Well, I was visiting a friend right before COVID hit in Jacksonville Beach. And one day we just drove up the coast, and we drove through Emilia and had lunch in Fernandina. And it was, I think it's Stephanie's Cafe. And Stephanie's? Yes?
Center Street.
Good, okay. And who was sitting in the corner having lunch but Jacques Pépin? And I actually knew him from the Boston area.
Yeah.
And I knew Julia Child. And in fact, Julia cooked dinner for me one evening. That was a treat. So I went over. Of course, he had no idea who I was, but I was speaking in French, and we sort of, gained sort of a background in history, and he remembered certain things. And I went back to the Vineyard, and then this summer, this is now a year and a half later, I just woke up one morning and I said, I'm out of here. And now where do I go? And so I got on the computer, started Googling, and I decided it would be warm, but I didn't like Does anyone live in Naples here?
Been there.
Okay. I didn't like Naples. I didn't like West Palm Beach. I didn't like this. I didn't like that Sarasota. And I said, what's the name of that place? Really. And I called my friend, Linda, and she said, oh, that was Amelia Island. And I said, oh, let me call you back later. So I got online and there was a home for sale, Amelia Island Plantation. And I looked at it and I asked if she would go and see it the next morning because, real estate was going so quickly in May. This was just this year. She went up there, she phoned me, she loved it. And I said, okay. And I bought it sight unseen. So I'm usually more cautious, but not really.
So you are a relative newcomer to Amelia.
I've actually moved here 3 months ago, exactly.
Okay.
Yesterday.
Okay.
90
So
days.
to some extent, it hasn't really given you enough time to see what happens on Amelia when all the tourists go home.
No, but I'm going to find out.
Okay.
Then she's going to write about it.
Yeah, that's exactly
Be
right.
careful.
That's exactly right. But this is different because the tourists don't go home. Tourists. The year round, this is much more of a year-round community
Mhm.
than the Vineyard is. You will see there that right after Columbus Day, everything closes. It's as if somebody just moved all the props and went some other place. And there are only there's 6 towns, but there are only 1 or 2 restaurants that will be open now. I just spoke to a friend of mine this morning and she's saying it's just awful there now and until May. So the island closes. There's still people living there, but it closes.
And you can still get in and out. I mean,
If the ferry's running,
if the ferry's running,
or
and
if you
the
have money
planes are
and
flying.
have the
Yeah,
plane, either
Mhm.
one.
Mhm.
But otherwise, you're stuck there.
right.
And so it is wildly beautiful. And the vineyards have done a very good job considering there isn't any one local historic district in preserving things. They recognize the value. There are no McDonald's. There's not even a stoplight. They're not allowed. No chain, no nothing. So it's sort of the, independent bookstores. There's 2 of them,
Mhm.
and several restaurants, and then clothing stores and things like that really appeal to more the summer crowd.
And from what I remember of being there, I just remember like 3. You mentioned 6 distinct pockets. I only remember 3 of them.
There are only 3 important ones.
So Martha's Vineyard, Edgartown, and Oak Bluff.
Then there's Gay Head, which is now called Aquina, and Gay Head is where the Wampanoags live, and they say Indian, not Native American, the Indian population, and Gay refers to the about the sort of 1880s when the vineyard was discovered, and the cliffs there are painted, not painted, but they are gaily colored, reds and yellows and so forth. So the town, which is, the vineyard's a triangle, and Gay Head is up here, and that was called Gay Head. In recent years, it was changed from Gay to Aquina.
Mm.
And then there is Chilmark, and then there is West Tisbury. So, for example, David McCullough, the author, lives in West Tisbury.
Mhm.
It's a very quiet, rural farm town. And Chilmark is filled with sort of New York writers, but they're not my kind of writer. There are newspapers, and there's, sort of politics and this and that. And then there's a big sort of film crew here.
Mhm.
Then actually the Obamas are there, and the Clintons were there. The Obamas just bought about 2 years ago a $40 million estate in Edgartown. You can earn a lot of money if you become president of the United States.
Yes.
Just saying. So it's really, it's no commentary from me, none. And then there are alpaca farms, and there's sheep shearing, and everything.
And to some extent, each town has its own individual character.
Very much.
And I guess where I'm going with this and what I'm thinking about is the class difference.
Yes, I was going to.
Because it's the same thing, that makes me think about what happens here on Amelia Island. Because you've got service workers who are priced out of the market. But, so now you see the traffic inbound on A1A coming in because people are living in Yulee and Hilliard and Callahan and beyond, and they're coming to work here on the island. But when you're on an island, what do?
This is a huge problem. Real estate is fabulously expensive, about probably 5 or 6 times more than values here. I just mentioned the Obamas with 40 million. That's not even the top of the heap. So working people really cannot live there unless they've inherited from their families. You'll see every single town, the 6 towns, every single employee is the granddaughter or grandson of another employee, and the daughter and son of their children and so forth, because they've had their homestead for a long time, and they can still live here. I still live there, and they do. But there's always talk about the housing crisis, and no one has really gotten together to solve it. But more than the economic differences, there's really a lot of racial and caste differences, which you would not expect on the island of Martha's Vineyard.
And that's what makes your book so interesting is that the Portuguese influence from dating back to 1600s or something, or beyond that. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, there are people who are born on the vineyard. They might be our age, and they call themselves natives. They're not natives. They were born on the island, that's all. They are in one respect. And then you start looking beyond that, and you see that there are these big divides. The Portuguese came, although early, most of them came around the 1820s and 1830s because they were picked up along the way in the whaling schooners and ships for extra help. And they landed in northeastern Massachusetts, and of course on the Vineyard because of the whaling center. And there are 2 groups of Portuguese, although if you were there, unless you're embedded in the community, you would assume the Portuguese were the Portuguese. Well, they're not. There are 2 distinct classes, in fact, races of Portuguese. The Azorians, the Azores are about 500 miles off Lisbon, say, they're European stock, whereas the Cape Verdeans is off Senegal, West Africa, about the same distance. And so the 2 groups were wildly different. And
what they had in common was their language.
What they had in common was this whaling ship, and they're all put there together. And it wasn't a really pleasant time, a pleasant trip over. So a lot arrived on the island, and the Cape Verdeans lived there, and the Azorians lived there, and they spoke Portuguese and went to the Portuguese churches and schools and so forth. They had different ones. So they were absolutely divided, and the Cape Verdeans were looked down upon by the Europeans. But no one knew that unless you were embedded, in the community. Everyone at Edgartown thought they were all Portuguese. Portuguese is the name.
But it sounded like some of the English settlers and the descendants of the original English farmers and growers and whoever settled the vineyard first looked down on both of those groups.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
You just, maybe you'd have them work for you, but that would be about it. Many had greenhouses, so at Christmas they buy the original stock. We'd buy poinsettias from Danny Bernard's greenhouse in Oak Bluffs, and you'd never go to Oak Bluffs, by the way. That's where the Portuguese live. So, it's very interesting, and you don't really understand the tension and the racial discord unless you get below the summer level. Because the summer people, if we were summer people, would be sitting in our porch, sipping iced tea, watching the sailboats, see our kids with tennis rackets going to the yacht club and banging, balls back and forth. But you don't know these people, and you just see them as workers. Some looked a little darker than the others, but they all spoke Portuguese, therefore they were Portuguese. And that's the Maria, who's the chief character. She was caught up in that because her family was from the Azorians, the Europeans. And yet she was still badly treated in high school and growing up. And she was, her mother was a cleaning woman and her father was sort of down in the docks doing, things with boats. And she was really cast out, even though her mother cleaned for the best of the summer people. And she got to play with their kids when she was little. But when she started to be in the age of, teenagers, they went their way and didn't want Maria part of that group. So there's a lot of tension, and there still is on the island, but it's probably somewhat less today. But you see all sorts of things. The Wampanoags, who were the original people 7,000 years ago, were just not even considered. They lived way up there in Gay Head, and you don't even have anything to do with them. It was that sort of attitude. And so they weren't in the mix. And they were just shoved aside. They were almost like the Lemlings, they were shoved off the cliff. They stopped right there. They held their ground. But the Europeans were the first settlers, and then the Portuguese, and then there were the summer people from all over, but mainly the East Coast, but could be anywhere.
Yeah. So how did the story itself unfold to you? How much, I guess it's another way of saying, how much of it is true and how much of it is fiction?
It's probably about 99.98% true. My name isn't true. That's 0.01%. And the rest of it, it's really why I sort of picked a name to begin with. But Maria was somebody who I knew very well. And in fact, she had asked me to go into real estate business with her. And I was still earning a very modest salary at the Preservation Trust, really modest. And I thought, I could really make a lot of money. I really could.
Yeah, you sell a $40 million house, you're probably doing
and
okay.
she had everyone, just everyone. And I thought, and there was just something about her I just didn't like. I couldn't even put my finger on it. It was, you talk about animal instinct. I had the animal instinct. And I finally thanked her and said, I really love the Preservation Trust with my $17,000 a year job. Not, but I did like it. But I turned her down, and that saved me from ruin. I have no doubt about it. I would have been the fall guy. The attorney in the book, do you want me to talk about the attorney?
I guess,
No.
the question is, see, and I think this is really the challenge when we come to talking about mysteries,
What can you say?
how much can we talk about it without, giving away the whole plot? So I'm going to leave that to you.
I will tell you, without going into all of the different instances, Maria, let me see. Yeah, you're right.
So, but essentially, the themes in the book have to do with greed, with corruption.
Greed, corruption prevail on Martha's Vineyard. And this, and greed and corruption and white collar crime I know probably 15 or more professionals, bankers, real estate brokers, attorneys, teachers that have all been caught, arrested, and to some degree punished. Some in prison, a real prison, not the county jail. Some in the county jail, some doing community work, like everyone does, and some making restitution, and others just can't do it. So it is unbelievable. And almost every one of these people, after they do their sort of penance, they come back and they become members of the planning board in Edgartown. The attorney is now head of the zoning board of appeals. Yep. And Maria is, unfortunately for her, dead, or else she would be back, in things. So it's a forgiving place, too forgiving a place. And you can do anything you want there, I guess, short of murder. That's frowned upon today. But other than that, you can do anything you want and you'll be welcomed back.
And it sounds like with just a slap on the wrist, if anything.
Yeah, and you're very polite and you never say anything. So how is your 2 months in jail, or what would 3 years like? No, you don't. You never mention it again, ever.
Well, I hope it's not going to be too much of a spoiler, but at the very end of the book, when you become a juror.
Yes.
So I assume that really happened.
Yeah. I was foreman of the grand jury that indicted Maria with her, can I say Ponzi scheme out loud?
Sure.
Ponzi scheme. And the attorney was rapped on the knuckles, but nothing really happened to him. But I was foreman of the grand jury, and I told the judge, because we don't have any judges living there. They come in, they stay for 3 weeks or a month or something, and then they go off again. And you're asked, so can you be fair? Can you be this? Can you be that? And I said, look, I should tell you, I know her very well. She asked me to go into business with her. And he said, thank God you didn't. And I said, yes. And he said, can you be impartial? And I said, of course. Not really. But what did he know? But no, but really there was absolutely, she was caught absolutely red-handed, and there's nothing to even decide except.
Did you have to recuse yourself from that position?
No.
You didn't?
No.
Okay.
First of all, there aren't too many of us there in the off season. You have to take what you get.
17,000 year round.
And that's spread over 6 towns. And Edgartown, the town in which this takes place, is really the colonial sort of seat of the island, and that's the largest town, and that has 2,300 people. But these, including little kids, in school and stuff, and adults, I don't know, 1,000 maybe. So the pickings are slim for juries, and it's you can't believe everything that goes on. But it's like I mentioned it in the book, when the cat's away, the mice will play. And that's exactly, it's almost like you set your clock and you go, okay, it's going to start now. I wonder who's doing what. This is not in the book, but I can tell you a few things. And I'll name them because they're real people. Peter Vincent Jr., whose ancestors were some of the Vincents, were some of the first settlers on the island. He is an attorney, still is an attorney. And unfortunately, he needed some money. And so he embezzled from the Humane Society of $600,000. And also, that wasn't quite enough either. But he had a very nice elderly woman who was sort of losing her marbles, and dipped in a little bit there. not to worry, he didn't go to jail or prison or anything. He was given community service. A friend of his who was very wealthy bailed him out, made some restitution, but believe me, probably 10 cents on the dollar.
Mhm.
And Peter is now head of the Planning Commission and has been for years. And people hire him for a lawyer. But that's just one person, and it goes on and on and on. It's remarkable. But hi, Peter, how are you? Hi, Jane, how is it? Yeah, good, fine.
Yeah.
Nice to see you tonight, holding a glass of wine at a cocktail party and stuff. And yeah, it's great. What's going on? It's totally normal,
Mhm.
totally normal. There's nothing abnormal about it. Maria made a splash, but it wasn't awful. She did go to prison. Not in the book,
Mhm.
but she did go to prison. But she spent 2.5 years in the the federal penitentiary, basically.
So did she die in real life or just in the books?
She died in real life, but only recently. 6-7 years ago.
Yeah.
6 or 7 years ago.
Okay. And that's about the time that, the setting for the book is 2015, so it's about
Yeah.
6 years ago.
Right. So it's a story, as you said, of greed.
Mhm.
It's a story of class, because the summer folk versus the year-rounders, but it's also caste, racial. And even though you would think the Wampanoags would be, sort of the most inaccessible, perhaps, as groups, it turns out it's the Portuguese. And it's less the Azorians, but it's more the Cape Verdeans, and so forth and so on. And then in recent years, there's been the Providence, Rhode Island Mafia who's come in. So there's a big Italian population in a small area that's also under scrutiny now as we speak. So there's always something going on.
Donna is in the middle of reading the 1619 Project.
Oh, yeah.
If you're familiar with it. So I'm getting a report every morning with a different chapter of something else that she's learned. And, you just see this thread of how much we don't know and how much has never been taught. But how pervasive this racial animosity has been throughout this country.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it was no exception.
But if you were there for the summer, you'd be, as I said, you'd be on your porch and you'd be sipping iced tea. You wouldn't know what's going on. You wouldn't have a clue what's going on.
Well, I think what's going to be really interesting to me is, as the longer you're here, what are you going to begin to see as the similarities of Amelia Island to Martha's Vineyard?
I think there's, this is my, 91 days now.
Mhm.
I think that there's certainly racial tension. There is already. I've seen that. Everyone's very polite and so forth, but I think there is some. And I think there's going to be certain similarities with criminal elements under the guise of very, well and thought of individuals who have a role in the community, an external role in the community. I think there's going to be a lot of that, probably in the county level.
It's a question of whether or not anyone winds up looking into it and investigating it, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I love that sort of stuff.
Now, did you spend any time in journalism too? Because I remember there's a little something in the book about you were interviewing for a job, or was that just made up?
That was made up, but I have been, I've had some unusual things. I have been interviewed. I have been on 48 Hours with Dan Rather when he was, that was before it became a crime show. It was more like 60 Minutes. And that was to do with the attorney.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an hour-long show. And I've had some interesting experiences, but not as a journalist per se. I did write a column on Edgartown, social column,
Mhm.
that got me in trouble because that was my first pen name.
Mm.
I had a totally different name because I couldn't expose myself. So I would be making sort of stories about, Barbara Nevin Friday night had a lovely cocktail party in the lawn and, catered by so-and-so and who was there, but, Becky Smith, and Becky was dressed in something or other. And they would be really just sarcastic, as you could be. So people started loving the column and reading it to laugh. And one day I had to bring it in to the Martha's Vineyard Times Tuesday, I'll never forget this, Tuesday night at 5 p.m. That was the deadline because it was being published on Thursday. They had to have it. And they had a summer person there helping the desk. And she said, "And what is your name?" And I said, "It's Jane Chittick." And I said, "Well, it doesn't really matter because my name is such, I can't even remember it now, but Jerry will know what this is and just give it to him, please." Thursday, it came out the column by Jane Chittick, and it was like one of the worst ones.
Uh-oh.
It was, I thought it was hilariously funny,
Mm.
but worse if you're living there in this little community. And I had exposed some of my trustees at the Preservation Trust. It was awful.
Oops.
Yeah, and sort of some friends, maybe not my best friend, but people I knew. And that was horrifying. That was just the worst time. I'm still like burning today. It's awful. Yeah, so I've done writing for different things and magazine articles and things like that.
Such is the difficulty of taking on different personas.
Yes,
suppose.
I think it's much easier just to be Jane Chittick.
Well,
I
it'll
think.
be interesting now because you're still going to be both,
Yep.
clearly, and I guess you'll just have to figure out who you want to be when you grow up.
Yeah, I don't think I will be, but so I could try a third name. It would really confuse people.
How about any questions at this point? Do you think?
We haven't really given away the plot, but it is.
But I don't want to.
No,
either.
I know. It is really, it's an interesting plot when you think of it.
Mhm.
You can think of Bernie Madoff and it doesn't come close.
Is this your first book, Jane?
Yes, but I have the sequel ready. It's not ready yet because I'm still moving in. But there is a sequel. And when you read the first book, if you read the first book, you know about the real estate broker, Maria. You will know about the attorney. And then everyone else sort of is way in the background. But in fact, the real story is among two people in the background that will emerge in the next book.
Hmm.
Yeah. And you won't pick up on it. You won't even know.
And then the third book will be about us.
Yeah, I'm gonna start in. If you have any crime you'd like to report to me, go ahead.
Well,
Who was the philanthropist that started?
Fairleigh S. Dickinson Jr. His father, Becton Dickinson, is one of the big, not pharmaceuticals, hospital supply, bandages and all that. And the university in New Jersey is the Fairleigh Dickinson University, named after his father. And my Fairleigh S. Dickinson is a junior, and he was just selfless. He just gave millions and millions and millions to help the island.
Did you have any involvement of the universities, Boston, MIT, Harvard?
Well,
in
I was
historic preservation?
Yes. Preservation, I started with Benjamin Thompson, who was the dean of the Harvard School of Architecture, dean of design, Harvard School of Architecture. And he developed Faneuil Hall Marketplace, if you've been to Boston, Quincy Market and so forth. And I worked directly for him. And that's how I got to know Julia Child and Jacques Pépin and that sort of group of people.
I thought that was Ralph's.
Who?
Ralph's.
Ralph's?
Ralph's, R-O-U.
Oh, right, he was the developer, James Rouse, Jim Rouse. Ben was the brilliant mind behind it. transforming it. And Jim Rouse, or James Rouse, was the big builder, put it all together. But Ben was the architect and the creator of it, if you will. Are you in architecture?
I was dean of the College of Design at the University of Florida,
Oh, no kidding.
and we had a big presence in Nantucket.
Yeah.
And I spent several summers in Nantucket. We created an institute, it's called Preservation Institute Nantucket. And we would have about 30 students there every summer working on preservation projects.
Oh, it's great.
And it's very similar to Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah. Now, Nantucket's one town and one tiny island.
Yeah, but it's got all those class issues.
It is the same thing.
Yes.
Yep, you're absolutely right.
It's interesting.
And you saw that even though you were there in summers, right?
That's stupid. I didn't see it.
Well, it's people can hide
Well,
things.
a person named Walter Beinecke.
Oh, I actually knew him.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
He was our benefactor.
Yeah,
He made his fortune from S&H green stamps.
Yep.
Green stamps.
Yep.
And he donated.
he and
to
Dick
us.
Dickinson, Fairley's nickname was Dick. Dick Dickinson, they were good friends.
And there was lots of intrigue in his family.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
You guys should go back to Nantucket then.
Well, thank you all for coming this
Yeah, that's-
afternoon. Jane will be.
great.
Is Jane Isabella? Isabella Jane will be happy.
Maybe that's my new name, Isabella Jane.
There you go. We'll be happy to autograph books if you'd like to purchase one, and you can just take it downstairs. They'd be happy to help you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
spending time with us today.
I couldn't give away the book, but you're right.
No, that was nice.
I mean, it just-
Because we want to read it.
Yeah, it's hard. But let me tell you, you should look for Catherine Graham in the book.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Because
She's
that's the
dead.
character to come.
No, I won't say anything, but
We'll
But-
recognize her when we get in here.
she's actually named.
Oh, okay.
She's really named.
She's really named.
I mean, that's one of the true names in the book.
Hmm.
And it's a very important name, although she had no clue it was that
Mm.
important. Oh, well, she did. She was important, but,
do you have a lot of
Washington
people angry
Post.
with you from Martha's Vineyard?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you have a lot of people angry with you from Martha's
I think
Vineyard?
so, yes. Yes. But
But
you,
that's another reason you came 1,500 miles away.
right, how far could I go without being in South America? That has a bridge that could get me off as quickly as possible. Yes, but I think there are more people who are laughing and thinking it's really gutsy and fun, to have done this. So.
But at least your life isn't in danger for something that. You
Not
don't
right
think so.
here. No one's from the vineyard here, are they? Please. No, but actually there was sort of at one point, but not. It passed.
Yeah.
It was the attorney. He wasn't happy.
Can imagine.
But so that's interesting. Your background, obviously, in architecture and preservation.
Yeah, I mean, they're beautiful places, but when I was in Nantucket, school teachers could not live there.
Right.
And they would commute 2 hours each way on the ferry.
Yeah, to Hyannis.
For
Yeah.
their jobs. And
Yeah.
police, all these service people. It's
Yep.
very, very hard.
It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
And the only ones who can be there are the very wealthy and the ones who inherited land when it was first discovered by the English,
Mhm.
and the Wampanoag.
Some of the local people that had inherited properties there that I knew would often vacate and rent out their houses or stay in garage apartments and rent to the tourists is the only way they could continue to do
Yeah,
it.
that's done a lot. That's done, not the very, very, very wealthy,
Right.
but the next tier down.
Mhm.
You would consider them wealthy, but they're not that wealthy.
The house is probably only worth 10 to 20 million. rather
Yeah,
than-
exactly.
Obama wealthy.
But we still talk to them, even though they're not in the 40 plus.
Yeah.
Something just sold about 2 weeks ago for 115 million. It's just, you can't believe it.
No, it
Seriously.
really is hard to believe. But then again, I see what's happened here
Yeah.
too in 20 years, and it's hard to believe.
Mhm.
We just had a house in Amelia Park sell for $1.2 million.
Really?
Oh.
Wow.
And I was completely astounded by that. So,
I do have something important to say.
okay.
In the book, there is the Preservation Trust that was mentioned. I have a different name. I was the executive director in real life and also in the book, sort of. And my successor, this past summer when I was still there, she's the second person after I left, was arrested for, she's the executive director of the Martha's Vineyard Historic Preservation Trust. There's nothing loftier than that. She was arrested for embezzling and forging.
Wow.
Now that's she followed me. There was a guy in between, but she followed me. I don't know why I didn't mention that, but I'm telling you, it's like this is like the do-good, wonderful charity that everybody loves to give to, because we do wonderful work and so forth. And there she is, embezzling.
Kind of begs the question in my mind about what's the motivation? I mean, is it just because people feel like they need more money to live there, or is greed just part of human nature?
I've never seen more greed in my life. Really, seriously. It's just, as I mentioned, bankers, and I mentioned lawyers specifically, and I could go on, and now the executive director of the illustrious Preservation Trust that Fairleigh S. Dickinson started, and I brought along. I mean, you can see lawyers, right?
Yeah.
I can. You can see bankers, it's so easy. But a good-hearted preservationist, she was head of the, before she came here, Strawberry Bank in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Have you heard of that? It's a tiny, small historic preservation effort, almost like Sturbridge Village or Williamsburg or something like that. It's tiny. And she has a degree in architecture and everything, and she came here, and
That's hard to believe.
yeah, she's back in New Hampshire now, though.
Yeah.
What did writing the book do for you? Personally?
Catharsis.
Was it a catharsis?
Yeah, because I got a lot of pent up. I was just I was partially a victim in the book, although you won't know it. And it's just having to keep these little secrets, to be polite and to do this and do that, when in fact you should be, you are outraged. And I think it was time to expose. And that's, I think, what maybe I was doing, exposing, even though it's fiction, sort of fiction.
Names have been changed to protect the innocent?
No, the
or
guilty.
The guilty.
Yeah. The guilty. Yeah. And so I don't know why I didn't even think of mentioning my successor, excuse me. But here she is.
She would be the next one.
Yes, she will.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Oh, I'm just, for you all. That was great.
Good.